I'm not even recording. Mario is recording.
I'm saying, can other people also record?
Yeah, there is a way.
You
He can send it to me, and I've done that before. Yeah. So during these challenging COVID times, one interesting aspect of the effects of the virus is the rise of using Zoom, like we're doing, internet platform to organize virtual meetings. The proliferation of Zoom has led to a number of fascinating halachic questions concerning virtual gatherings and watching various events from afar. In the shir regarding issues of tefillah, we discussed the questions of tefillah and minyanim held on Zoom. If you remember, the basic consensus was you could not establish a minyan using Zoom with 10 people in different areas. There were some matirim, but it looked like the majority halachic opinion was you could not. Now here, tonight we're going to discuss Zoom for other events. For example, reciting Birchas HaGomel over Zoom. Does that need a minyan? Is that a davar shebekdusha where the minyan has to be in one place? Right? Most poskim hold in tefillah that 10 individuals gathered together on Zoom do not constitute a minyan. What is the halacha concerning reciting Birchas HaGomel, which also requires a minyan? Is this also not allowed to be recited in the presence of 10 individuals watching and listening on Zoom? Or might this be different than the usual requirement for minyan? So the requirement for minyan for Birchas HaGomel is mentioned in the Gemara Brachas 54b and is brought down in Shulchan Aruch in Orach Chaim Reish Yud Tes. Tzarech levarich bracha zu b'fnei asara. Birchas HaGomel should be recited in front of 10 people. Utrei minayu rabbanon. 2 of them should be rabbis or Torah scholars. Tichsiv by Ramamu b'kalam uv'moshav zikenim yehalaluhu. So the Ramamu b'kal the kahal kahal is assumed to be 10, and then it added moshav zikenim. Zakein usually refers to zekana chachma, and zakenim is plural. So that's the minimum plural is 2. So that's where they came up with this din that 10 and 2 of them have to be Talmidei Chachamim. V'im lo shchichi rabbanon lo yanich milevarech. But if there happens not to be 10 Talmidei Chachamim in the group of 10, you can still make the bracha. V'nogu levarech achar kriyas haTorah lefi sheyesh sham asara. So it doesn't say that, it says you should make the Birchas HaGomel when you lane, because we know when you lane you have to have 10 people, so it seems like a convenient time to make the Birchas HaGomel. V'im birech b'pachos masshara yesh oimrim sheyatsa. So there is an opinion that says even if you make the Birchas HaGomel less than 10, you're yotze. Yesh oimrim shelo yatsa. The tov lachzer levarech b'fnei asara b'li askar shemu malchus. That means if you recited the Birchas HaGomel with less than 10, then the next time you're in the presence of 10, you should say it again without saying the name of Hashem. Rav Ovadia Yosef seems to hold that the minyan must be in the same room in order to recite this bracha. Rav Ovadia states that a woman may only recite Birchas HaGomel in the women's section of the shul if the mechitza does not reach all the way to the ceiling, such that they are considered to be in the same room. But this is a great debate among the later Achronim, whether women who sit in the Ezras Noshim are considered to be in the shul itself or not. This has to do with, for example, those who say a woman could say Kaddish. So, for example, Rav Moshe, of course, we have a musmach of him with us, Rav Yaakov, he knows this very well. Rav Moshe held that the Ezras Noshim was not considered to be in the shul. And therefore, if a woman wanted to say Kaddish, she should actually come to the back of the men's section and say Kaddish there. Rav Ovadia disagreed with him and said that as long as the mechitza does not go all the way up to the ceiling, like our mechitzas, I guess There are some places where they're actually in another room, like by Satmar or other, where there you would say the mechitza goes up to the ceiling. There, Rav Ovadia would hold it's not considered to be in the shul. But if the mechitza that only goes up 10 feet, right? So there he would hold the woman could say the Birchas HaGomel there. Okay?
The concept is that you have to have 10.
You certainly have to have 10 men. Women don't. So let's see. So Rav Ovadia wants to say that to say Birchas HaGomel, you need 10 men in the same room. Let's see how he says it. The Gamash of Moran Achidah, the Birchas Yosef, B'Shem Knesses Agdola, Sha'isha Tevorach Be'ezras Noshim, but my Rishiyesh Asra Noshim V'Esa Knesses. The reason why the woman could say it in her section is because there's 10 men there. V'nir D'Mai Rishein Mechitzas Azor Magia Atikra. And the woman could say it sitting in the Ezras Noshim only if her wall dividing between the men and the women don't go all the way to the ceiling. Amash cause of Rav Peretz bagot smak shemechitzo shembeis hakneses shein magias legag afal pishik voice asort v'ochem v'yoyser ein mafsikos lebeis hakneses. So there is an opinion that even though you have walls that separate that are 10 tvachim high, it doesn't sort of divide the base knesses into this is the base knesses and this is not. So Rav Ovadia Yosef says, as long as the mechitza doesn't go up to the roof, a woman could say the base Birchas HaGomel on her side of the woman's section, as long as there's 10 men. We're mashma from there that Rav Ovadia holds you need 10 men to say Birchas HaGomel in the same room. One can infer from here that if the minyan was in an adjacent room, one would not be allowed to recite Birchas HaGomel, even if the people in the minyan could hear the bracha. If so, Rav Ovadia would certainly hold that the bracha may not be recited with 10 people listening in on Zoom, or for example, on a phone conference. Rav Shlomo Aviner issued the same ruling with regard to Zoom. He was asked, Efshar levarech birchas hagomel b'Zoom? Lo, tzarech asar anashim b'makom echad. However, Rav Hershel Schechter suggested that if one cannot participate in the minyan during the first 30 days after recovering from illness, or after any other event for which one would need to recite Hagomel. So let's understand. The requirements of a Hagomel is if you were sick and you were healed, you were released from prison, if you were traveling across a sea or a midbar. And so you need to say the Gomel within 30 days. So Rav Schechter is going to say that if you had no ability to go to shul to say a Gomel, why? Because the shuls were closed and there was no Kriyas HaTorah, right? One would be allowed to have 10 people listen to the bracha on Zoom or other means of live video conference. Rav Schechter explains that the purpose of the minyan in this context is to publicize the salvation, which can be accomplished over the internet. It's not to create an tzibur, which has shechina, right? Why do we have 10 people for Kaddish or Kedusha? Because those are things that are have to be said. Makom, those are things that are of Kedusha status. And therefore, you need a certain amount of people to create the environment that the Shekhinah should be there so that you could say those Dvorim Shabigdusha. But here the Birchas HaGomel is being described, it's almost like a pirsum anes. It's like spreading the word that you were saved. And therefore, that could be done technically via a Zoom approach.
So the posting before Rav Hershel Schechter made his comment appeared to have equated Birchas HaGomel to the same thing with Tefillah. You can only have a minyan if all 10 people were visible.
Yes, that's correct. That's correct.
It's the same.
Let's say it's 25 days after he was healed. He's got a trigger of 30 days. And they haven't opened up the shuls because the epidemic is still rampant. You can't gather 10 people because of the danger. Sheyesh levarech derech Zoom. He says you can make the bracha through Zoom. Chada, dalpi pshuto, ein atzarach lasor b'toras davar shebekdusha, shenitzrach sheyu kulam b'cheder echad. He doesn't think the Birchas HaGomel is one of those things that are dvorim shebekdusha that you need 10 people in one place. Ela b'toras pirsumei nisa, the hodaya barabim, and just giving public thanks. Ve'yesha kol asar makshivim lo derech Zoom. 10 people are listening through Zoom or telephone. Bahachi sagi. So that's Rav Shechter.
So there's certain phrases that Rav Shechter say you could use Zoom, not a blanket thing that everything is valid.
Jerry, previously we learned you cannot make a minyan via Zoom. A minyan, for example, to say Kaddish. Let's say
Ernie, can you repeat the question? We can't hear.
Jerry asked to clarify what Rav Shechter is saying. It seems like he made a difference here. He's allowing Zoom. And so I'm explaining, because Jerry may not have been at those shiurim where we learned that something that requires a dover shebekdusha, which means barchu, kedusha, kriyas haTorah, kaddish. There they require 10 people in a physical place or that they can see each other. And Rav Shechter agreed with that. And that, like he just said, this is not that kind of thing, which is a dover shebekdusha that needs 10 people in one cheder. And it's due to that you want to spread the fact that you were saved, you give thanksgiving. And that's why Zoom is adequate for that. Rav Usher Weiss was asked a question by the associate rabbi of Bnei Yeshurun in Teaneck. He reached the same conclusion, that if one will be unable to recite the bracha with a minyan within 30 days of recovering physically, one may gather 10 people together on Zoom and recite the bracha. He explains that although the Shulchan Aruch cites two opinions as to whether one fulfills one's obligation when reciting a goma without a minyan, the Mishnah Berurah cites the Ra'ah that one may be lenient if 30 days pass, which seems to be the Mishnah Berurah's practical ruling. Therefore, Rav Weiss rules that if one will otherwise not be able to recite a goma with a minyan within 30 days, one should instead recite it with a minyan via Zoom. Somebody who got healed from the corona. He wants to make the Birchas HaGomel to thank Hashem. He cannot gather with 10 people physically in one place because of the quarantine. Can he do it if people gather with him through virtual methods, technological methods? They all see him and they hear his voice. He responds to the rabbi who asked him the question. It certainly serves a strong purpose for the person who's going to make the bracha because he wants to thank God. He says this is a value to people who are still sick with corona and they hear about someone who was healed and made a Birchas HaGomel. It gives them chizuk that they're going to be healed too. Yesh oimrim yotza. He says there are the opinions that say that if a person does the bracha via Zoom, he'll be yotzei. The whole ikar asara eina ela mitzvah. The whole need for 10, fine, mitzvah min hamuvcher. But lefi zem yoder shlo yizdanu lo asara yivarech b'lo asara afilu chatchila. You could, if you know you cannot get 10, it's a mitzvah for him to do it even lechatchila without 10. Va'ayin behilchos hara'ah, shekasov the yamtin ad shloshim yom. He should, before doing it, he should wait 30 days. Pen yizdamin lo asar sheyuchal lekayim mitzvah kelchasov yoser lo yamtin. But you don't have to wait more than 30 days. You can say it with a group of people under 10, even within the 30 days. V'yesh la'ayin b'kavanos ha'mishnah. What What was the intent of the Mishnah Berurah to bring the Ra'ah here? Is he means to say that if 30 days have passed, he should make the bracha without 10? Maybe the Mishnah Berurah is only going to that opinion in the Yeshomrim that said that b'di'evet you're yotze without 10. Like the Bir Halacha explained. So really the Mishnah Berurah Lamaisa is not, that's not his final psak. Onan, kol abaki b'signono shel Mishnah Berurah. Whoever knows the style of the Mishnah Berurah, yishpot al nachon, zechen das Mishnah Berurah. Shemegamaso b'chol mokom livsok lamaisa v'lo pilpula b'al makosik. The Mishnah Berurah is always to give a practical ruling. He's not just being mefalpel. So if the Ra'ah brought it, the Rav Osher Weiss sees it that you can utilize it. B'nei oshye od yesh lodun b'halacha zu, the efshar de mahani masha asor b'nei odem mishtatfim imo b'rocha zu be'echad ma'adrachim shebahem imroim v'shomim zed zeh. He thinks it'll work if people have gathered technologically in a way they can hear and see the person. Af im einhem nimtzom yachad, even if they're not in the same room. The af shekvar presamti sanira, even though he has already publicized that you cannot use Zoom, the Ein Asar Mitzdarfin L'Davar Shebekdusha. Jerry, Rav Osher Weiss also is among those who say you may not use Zoom to create a minyan for Davar Shebekdusha. Ela kashem roim v'shoimim zeh zeh ba'ofen bilti emtzai v'lo ma'ani b'zeh lo shmiya derech ha'telefon v'lo derech tochnot mechashev af im heim roim zeh zeh nikom hakom efshar d'shayni nidon nidan. That's by Davar Shebekdusha that it doesn't work. But in our case, the Lohavi Davar Shebekdusha, he says very clearly that Birchas HaGomel is not a Davar Shebekdusha. L'tzarek levarech lifnei asar k'dei lahodas HaKadosh Baruch Hu b'rabim, to give public thanks. U'k'dichsiv u'neramama shmo yachdav. Ve'efshar b'kach sagi. Even shaken asar roim v'shomim es berchaso. V'av shebofen klali sfurani shesh l'kaimes takanot chazal k'pshuton. Generally, Rav Osher Weiss avoids doing these kind of things. He wants people to do a mitzvah the way Chazal intended it to be done. U'v'ofen shetiknu chachamim. Kach kosafti. He has already written then, for example, Bikur Cholim B'sichas telephone. And he talked about Zmiris on Shabbos. Be'inyan adlokas ner Shabbos, using an electric candle for menorah. V'chein gam b'nidon didan. Mikol makom kiven to pashtus kavodas HaMishnah Berurah. Dim yavu shoshim yivarech af b'yochid. Since he says that after 30 days, the Mishnah Berurah held you could do it by yourself. Near Lamaisa to call od yeshiv sharut. As long as there's a possibility that you could make this more public and do it in front of 10 before the 30 days go by. That he's been healed from the machla, he feels good. If 30 days are going to pass, he says do it before 30 days with the Zoom method. What about bris milah? Do you need 10 people for bris milah?
Ernie, I just don't understand. It's a shas tchak. Shas tchak, of course, we want to do everything according to what the Rabbanan taught us and what the minhagim are. But you can. So what? You're not supposed to do that? In other words, I know that you want to do that, but why would he? I don't understand the psak. I'll be honest with you.
No, because Birchas HaGomel, it's a bracha. A bracha is not a doraisa. Now, the chiyuv to make such a bracha when you have to have hodah, so there's a chiyuv on you to do it. So the best way to do it is in front of public.
I understand.
So hang on. So he said the Ra'ah held that if 30 days pass and you didn't do it, you can do it in front of one person. You do it by yourself. So what they're saying is, since now you have a possibility of doing it in front of public, do it by public. That's what they're saying. Do it by Zoom. There's no problem doing it by Zoom. It's not the same status as minyan requirement. That's what they're saying.
Okay.
Now, what about a bris? So due to the restrictions during this time, it has at times been either difficult nor advised or forbidden to organize a minyan for ceremonies such as bris milah. Is it permitted, first of all, to perform a bris without a minyan? The Shulchan Aruch writes clearly, based on the tour, that although it is recommended to perform the bris and recite the accompanying brachos with the minyan, it's not required. Says the Shulchan Aruch in Yoredeya, Heicha de'efshar avdina l'mila basara. You should try to do it with 10. Heicha de'lo efshar avdina b'pachos masara. If you can't have a minyan, you can do it less than a minyan. It's not ma'akev, the bris. Tzurba bris, which is a sefer on bris, halachos of bris, gives the reasons why we should have a minyan. Yesh lishtad elasas abris b'mayim et asar Yisrael. It's like witnessing that 10 people are witnessing that the father brought the child to bris. The od shamila nikras os. Mila is called a sign. It's like a pirsum anes. It's like you're giving public thanks in front of 10. So even if a minyan of 10 males is unattainable, the Sefer Abris and Tzurba Bris cite authorities who write that when necessary, women may also count towards the minyan for these purposes, and possibly even the baby himself. I have the Sefer Bris upstairs. Uvedeleka gavri mitzarfim noshim va'avodim lasara. You don't have 10 men, women and avodim. We're talking about avodei knanim. We don't really have that anymore because they were mal. The command de mahali dami. So women are viewed as if they were gamal because they don't have an aver that needs mila, and an Eved Kanani had mila. One of the ways he could work in your house is he already had mila, so they have association to it. He says, see the Ramon Hilchos Megillah, shemistapik im noshim. He's mesupik. But nearly the gama kot nanimo ben ches, as long as the child is 8 months old, yesh litzarfu zelatam adarchei Moshe. The Darchei Moshe says you can count on the baby. 8 days old, not the Nemo. The 8-day-old child can be mitzaref. Mikol makom latama pirkei Rabbi Eliezer adayin tzarchiyun. He says, according to the, it needs more thought. Now, based on these sources, it would seem that if women, such as family members who can be present, can combine to form 10, this may fulfill the preference of having a minyan. And the same applies if the baby itself is the 10th. If even that is not possible or not advisable due to the health concerns, it would certainly seem preferable to perform the bris with only a handful of people present rather than delay the bris unnecessarily past the 8th day. This has indeed been the consensus of poskim during this time, as reflected by Rav Chaim Kanievsky. Binyan bris milah, moire, the ein tzarich l'chaim bris milah b'minyan anoshim, v'armer l'shoyalim the begimel anoshim sagi. He said it's enough to have 3 people. Well, the father, the moyel, and the child. That's how he said 3 because
During the corona, though.
you were talking about during Corona.
Kanievsky would not agree with just having 3 people, 4 people.
How is this different from Berachas HaGomel? You're saying
No, but
Shem
you know,
and Malchus here too.
Say again?
You're saying the brachas with Shem and Malchus.
But you don't need 10. It's not a davar shebekdush. This is not kedusha or baruch. It's about. Do you need a when you bench lulav? Do you need a minyan? Birchas HaGomel is a public declaration in front of 10 people of Hodas HaNes. This has nothing to do with that.
So the bris is also you're bringing a child into the covenant of Avraham
Right.
Avinu.
So he gave eitzes as to why there's an inyan of having 10, but there's no chiyuv to have 10. Shulchan Aruch said it himself. There's no chiyuv to have 10.
I mean, look, it's a mitzvah deraisa, and if you don't have 10, like they did brisson in Siberia, there was nobody there. It's a mitzvah deraisa to be mal the child on the 8th day. What do you do if you don't have a bris? You have to do it.
If you don't
If you
have
don't have
10,
a minyan, you have
don't
to
have
do
10.
it.
Exactly.
So
Exactly.
you're saying that if you didn't have the virus, you could have less than 10.
If you had the Shulchan, Jerry, Heicha de efshar avdinan lamila basar. That's the Shulchan Aruch. When you can gather 10, you should do it in 10. But if you can't, we're talking about not, the Shulchan Aruch didn't say in times of sakana. He says, Heicha de loy efshar, you lived in Siberia, like Yaakov said. You can't gather 10.
What else flies up to 11?
Avdinan b'pachas masar, you're allowed to do the bris, less than 10. So because Rav Lieberman in the Beit El Yeshiva website said, do you need a minyan for a bris? This is a very wise question. The Shulchan Aruch writes explicitly that when it's possible to bris with a minyan, it should be done. And when not possible, it can be done without 10. So in these times when the coronavirus is rampant, it should be done with the minimum amount of people. The moil and the father are most needed. He suggests a good photographer who keeps his distance to show the rest of the family and friends, especially those who are at high risk to the virus. Now, what about the brachas? Whether certain parts of a bris milah may be recited over Zoom. For example, if one of the relatives cannot attend the bris due to the restrictions of the number of people or not being able to travel, can they recite the bracha or name the baby via Zoom from a different location, right? They're not at the bris, but they want to honor the grandfather with naming the baby or making one of the other brachas. Rav Hershel Schechter rules that although the bracha recited following the bris milah, which is Baruch Pri HaGefen and Asher Kidash Yedid Mi Beten, that's the first bracha, that, he says, has to be done in person. But the next paragraph, Elokeinu v'Kevosenu, Kayim es hayelad hazeh la'aviv v'le'imo, where you name the baby, right? You usually give 2 kibudim. Baruch Pri HaGefen Asher Kidash Yedid Mi Beten. That's usually one Rav says that. And then another person comes up to do the Elokeinu v'Kevosenu. So Rav Schechter says the first bracha has to be done by a person physically there. But the naming of the baby may be recited elsewhere using Zoom. Rav Schechter says, Mitztaver Shasaba Mishtatev Bevrishal Nechto, the grandfather who is celebrating the bris of his grandson, Shemamaka Macher Derech Zoom, Rishai Likro Shem Atinok, he's allowed to do this naming the baby. Right, starting from Elokeinu v'Kevosenu. Aval levarach birchas asher kidash yedid mi beten. Shelo b'fnei atinok, to do that, and you're not in front of the child. Mistaver she'ein nachon. Va'af shechazal tamid darshu kolosh napsukim hazeh shamadur b'divrei shiroi moso umarim be'etzba. He wants to say like this: Kayim es hayelad hazeh le'aviv v'le'imo. Chazal normally, whenever you use the word hazeh, means you got to be able to point to it. Means you got to be in the room with it. So, but Rav Schechter seems to say it does make a difference, even though it says Kayim es hayelad hazeh, Heich yomer Kayim es hayelad hazeh, hatinik elfanei achei nirit l'gabi nusach hatchina zos ein la'akbid b'zeh. He doesn't think it's a problem, and that the grandfather can say it over Zoom. Rav Re'ema Cohen, Rosh Yeshiva of Otniel, is more lenient and allows reciting even the first bracha of Asher Kidash, even derech Zoom. He explains that in his opinion, Rav Kook and others permit responding amen and fulfilling one's obligation to recite a bracha on food or respond to dvorim shebedusha from afar, though online platforms would not be allowed to create a minyan. So let's evaluate. Let's elaborate. We've established that you cannot create the minyan with the Zoom. But let's say a minyan is there, and someone is saying Kaddish, and you're listening to that minyan over Zoom. Some hold you may not say Amen to it, or you may not respond, let's say, to Kedusha, and you go and say Baruch Shem. You're not that, since you're not physically there. But Rav Kook and other poskim hold. That's why those of you who remember at the Siyum Hashas at Royce Hall, someone was saying a Kaddish. There was a thing underneath. Don't respond Amen. Because they were poskening according, not like Rav Kook, that you're not even allowed to respond, even though there was a minyan in New York, we can't respond to that. But Rav Kook and others say that you're allowed to respond, amen, or for example, you're somewhere else, you hear somebody say, Bore mi name is Zonos, somewhere else, and you answer amen and eat a piece of cake. So those that say you can't do that over Zoom, you can't do it. Rav Kook says you can do that. Based on this, he suggests that since it's accepted that the bracha v'asher kidash is a birchas hashvach, it's not a birchas mitzvah, then it's a bracha of praise. For example, al natilas lulav is a bracha birchas mitzvah. La'aniach tefillin is a birchas mitzvah. Every bracha has to be analyzed. What kind of bracha is it? He's saying this kind of bracha is not a birchas mitzvah. It's a brachas hashvach. Asher kidash bidi beten. That HaKadosh Baruch Hu, we thank Hashem that He made this child holy and from the womb already. It's a birchas hashvach, and therefore it may be recited from afar, as only a birchas mitzvah must be recited in the location where the mitzvah is being fulfilled. Says the Re'em.
So Birchas Hamazon is a mitzvah, it's a Birchas HaMitzvah.
Yes.
Yeah, right.
Yes, because it's a mitzvah to bench. That's the mitzvah itself. It's even more. That's the only. Jerry asked about benching, so that's clearly a birchas mitzvah. It is the mitzvah. That means when we talk about brachas, all brachas are rabbinic. When you shake the lulav, the mitzvah is to shake the lulav. The Rabbanon established a din that you should say a birchas mitzvah on that mitzvah. So we say Asher Kiddushah mitzvah zivanu al natilas lulav. But if you shake the lulav without making that bracha, you're makayim the mitzvah. You understand?
Yes. You have a brachas, you have to be there.
Hang on, we're going to deal with that tonight. Okay. So again, let's just remember. But there you clearly have to be at the place you're doing the mitzvah. So be'ikvas hagbola shel misrad habriyut she'ein la'aroch brit mila im yoter masorin. She said the Minister of Health said not to make a bris with more than 10 people. Amanas limnot ispashtut, so that it shouldn't spread. Nishalti al yidei mo'al le'em nitin l'shatif bnei mishpach merachok al yidei telephone. A mo'al asked him, can he have the family participate through telephone or online? Kigon tochnot Zoom. V'hu ela shnei matzavim. Ayim nitan sha'saba, where the grandfather, it's dangerous, shemusukan shegil lebris, yitkabei b'amida librachos mirachok, if he can make these brachos from distance, v'im ze yachol yos rak kriyas Hashem, can he only do the kriyas Hashem, or gam birchas hagef and the birchas kores habris? L'ori kronos elu, yesh livchon, ma mamadan shel brachos, what are these brachos? Ha'im medubar al birchas ha-mitzvahs? Is it a bracha on a mitzvah? Okay, and it's starfus l'tfila, sheyes la'asoysa b'tzirfus michos labris? Is it a praise bracha? Maybe you can, somebody who's not physically there. Since you're making the bracha on wine, here's what's going to be. The Kiddush did me beten starts off with a boy priya gefen. Well, who's going to drink it? If the grandfather is going to say that bracha from Montreal, does he have to drink the wine? Does he have to have some wine with him and drink it? Or can you give it to the mother or to the child to drink? He says, according to all the opinions, you can give it to the mother to drink or to the child. If the mother doesn't drink, you still can make the bracha. But l'or zos b'mikra shelanu, k'dei lishmor al klal minagei Yisrael b'vrit, lateit me'ayayin le'em l'tinik nira, shenitin l'noka minag atainis. For example, you make a bris on a fast day, on Tisha B'Av, and you make boy priya gefen, who drinks? The child drinks, because nobody else can drink, because it's a fast day. The mother can drink because usually she's still perhaps considered bisakana where she can drink. He gives an eitzah that the grandfather who makes this bracha should have a cup of wine with him where he is. Everybody drinks. Rav Asher Weiss takes a third opinion, that all of the brachos can be recited in theory from afar. If the father is not present, he may recite the first two brachos, which is the brachos that the moyel makes. Lachniso bevriso shalav ravinu. He's going to say that the father, even though he's not there, could make that bracha as well. And another relative or friend who's not present may recite the bracha of Asher Kiddush. Nevertheless, Rav Weiss concludes that one should not have someone recite the third bracha from afar. It may cause people to employ this method in normal situations as well. This is a little bit to what Jerry was referring to. Rav Weiss is going to come down very strong at the end of this tshuva, that he's very careful not to allow certain things, because it's many times where a grandfather cannot attend a bris of his grandchild in Israel. The grandfather lives in LA and he has many children. The Chazal were mesakein these brachos to be said in the physical presence of the child. Now, it's COVID, so we're trying to, make it easier for people. But he says he doesn't want a slippery slope that all of a sudden from now on, nobody's going to travel or nobody's going to even gather, and it'll all be done by Zoom. So you're going to see what he says about that. And that's actually I think it's a very real concern. Hamachnises bno lebrisu shalam ravinu ve'ekev ha'magefa sabo shel harachanimo nimnam lishtatef bebris. The grandfather can't attend. Im efshar lechabdo levarech et habracha asher kiddush yedid mi beten derech ha'telefon or derech Zoom. Kvar katavti bekama tshuvot dim ein avi haben yachol liot nochach b'makam bris. If the father of the child cannot physically be at the bris, kagon sheyoshe bebeis hakel, he's in prison. Yacholu levarech beracha lachniso bevriso shalav ravinu ubircha shechianu. Very interesting. We in Eretz Yisrael, we in America do not say shechianu at a bris. Right? You've been to many brisim. Is there a shechianu said? In Eretz Yisrael they do. It's machlokas Eretz Yisrael and America. Why don't we say shechianu to bris? Because of the tsar of the yeled, right? The pain that the child is going through. We don't say shechianu. In Israel, they do say shechianu. So he says, if the father of the child is in prison, he can make the bracha of lachniso and shechianu derech telephone. And he says the bracha asher kiddush yidid, same thing. Kasher nochim shomim oto derech telephone v'onim omein. The kal v'chomer im ro'im oto. He says Zoom is better than telephone because you can see it. V'hu ro'eh otam shapir mevarchas kol shlosha brachos. He says you can make all these brachos. And they say, yes, you give the child the bris, the wine from the bris there. He says he's very hesitant to paskin this way. The shiny brachos lachniso v'shechel brachos amutelas ala av v'lo zulosa. By the father, he's the only one who says those brachos. Mistaber da'av v'varach avol pi she'ena omed b'makom shebo malim es bno. So it's very logical that only the father could do this. If the father's in prison or there's coronavirus, we could be making. Normally that bracha is said by someone who's there. It's not a certain person gets to say that bracha. It's usually given to someone who came to attend the simcha. Okay, mashakasav atu ashor. The brachos hanesuin mutelas ala nochachim. The brachos of Sheva brachos are a chiyuv on the people that are there. The kivin shekain lama nichnas lebayis asofek imefshel lechabed ezechad anochim levarich. Why? Let's ask someone who is there to make the bracha. Why should we put ourselves in a situation of sofek? The choshesh anibim may pirtza she'avkul chabedus asabim v'arabonim. Rabbi Osher Weiss is concerned that they're going to start giving great rabbis or grandfathers all of these kibudim levarch b'merchakim v'yetzei mitzena pirza gedola. He says there will be a great breach. He comes out to say that really they should give that bracha only to somebody there. We'll conclude this section on Bris Milah by noting that there are a number of other important practical questions that have been discussed over the past few months concerning Bris Milah and COVID that are beyond the purview of this year. These include how to do mitzitza, extracting the blood safely, performing a Bris Milah when the mother and baby have been diagnosed as having COVID, the proper position for the moil sonic and father to be during the bris to accommodate rules of social distancing, and whether a moil is obligated to travel somewhere to perform a bris that would require him to stay away from home with other people. And you can see the source below if you want to go into some of these other issues. Well, what about Sheva Brachas and making a wedding? Let's do that now. With that, we should conclude. Jewish life cycle has been affected in the manner of celebrating a wedding. How should a wedding be performed in times and places with corona? Although the large weddings that we become used to cannot be held in the same format, a wedding should minimally be formed with at least a minyan. What is the halacha, though, if it's unsafe or difficult to have even a minyan present? By briefly serving a few of the sources regarding a minyan of wedding, we can better appreciate what some of the poskim have ruled about this question over the past few months. There are two major parts of a wedding, the kiddushin and the nisuin. During the kiddushin, a bracha known as the birchas ha'erusin is recited, where we say, Asher Geshanu b'mitzvot v'tzivanu ala rayos, v'yitir lanos an nesuas, v'asur lanu es Yisrael, Mekadesh Amo Yisrael ayidei chuppah v'kiddushin. That's the birchas kiddushin, the first bracha with boy pri hagefen. And then the chassan gives a ring to the kala in the presence of two witnesses and declares that she's Mekadesh. Then in the nisuin, the chad and kala stand underneath the chuppah, and the Sheva brachas are said. So the Gemara in Ksubah states that the birchas chasanim may only be recited in the presence of a minyan. It does not specify whether the halacha is the same for the birchas erusin, that original bracha that we said at the beginning. The Rishonim dispute whether the birchas erusin, in fact, requires a minyan. According to the Shiltas recited by the Ran in Ksubas, a minyan is required. But according to most Rishonim, including the Orchos Chaim and the Kolbo, a minyan is not required. The Shulchan Aruch rules that one should recite it with a minyan, but it's only required lechatchila, which means b'di'eved, it would also work. Birchas erusin tzrich asar lechatchila. But if they did it without a minyan, b'di'eved, the bracha would be effective. The Beis Shmuel confirms that if one cannot organize a minyan, it's permitted to recite the bracha without it. And one only needs two witnesses to attest to the kiddushin in addition to the chassan and kala. Tzrich asar lechatchila, v'imlek asara ein ikuv. Beis Shmuel is the commentary on Even HaEzer in Shulchan Aruch. The Sheva Brachos constitutes more of a halachic difficulty. The Gemara in Ksubas clearly states that birchas chasani must be in the presence of a minyan. Amar Rav Nachman, Amar li Huna bar Nosan Tana, Inayla birchas chasani basora. How do I know the brachos? The Sheva Brachos have to be with 10. Shenemar. This was Boaz. We just read Rus. Vayikach asara nashim miziknei ha'ir, vayomer shvu po. So that, and he married Rus. Bravavo Amar Mehacha. B'makelos barchu Elokim Hashem imkor Yisrael. Right, the Makor Yisrael refers to the uterus and to the birth of children. So bikalam, a kahal has to be at least 10 people. Clearly, according to Gemara, one may not recite the Sheva Brachos without a minyan. And this is the accepted halacha of the Shulchan Aruch as well, where it is specified that both Sheva Brachos at the wedding and the Sheva Brachos recited after a meal for the 7 days after the wedding are subject to this rule. Ein mevarchin birchas chasanim ela basar gedolim uvnei choyrim v'chasim min aminyan bein kishoyim moisam b'shas nesuim bein kishoyim moisam achar birchas hamazon. whether you do it at the wedding or you do it after a meal. So it seems from the Shulchan Aruch that you must have 10 people. If so, the question then becomes whether the wedding is halachically valid without the Sheva Brachas. This question is in fact subject to a dispute among the Rishonim and Achronim. The Beis Shmuel, which we said was the main commentary on the Shulchan Aruch and Even HaEzer, summarizes some of the sources, explaining that the Rashba and the Beis Yosef holds that one may not perform the wedding without Sheva Brachas, while the Trumas Hadesh and Darchei Moshe is the Ramah, hold that in cases of extreme need, there's room to be lenient. Uvemalkum de lekasara ein lasos nesuim kach kosav al Rashba. The Rashba, who lived in Barcelona, says if you don't have 10, you shouldn't make the wedding. With Suke Maroy, Rav Yaakov, remember the shul in Barcelona, the Rashba's shul in Barcelona.
I do. Yeah.
Remember, it was
We were
like in a basement.
We
We
were
were
there,
there. You
yeah.
can say we were there.
Yeah.
So the Piskei Marai Choylek al Zeva Beis Yosef Iskim L'Divrei Rashba. So the Beis Yosef, who was Rav Yosef Karo, the author of Shulchan Aruch, the commentary on the tour, held like the Rashba. However, the Darkei Moshe, the Ramah Kosav, Ein Dvar Nirim, Ela Eina Brachos Makvin. He says if you don't have the Sheva Brachos, it's not Makiv, the marriage. Lechatchila yesh lizar lahader achrasar. Lechatchila, you should try to get 10. The im efshar basara ela betarch gadol havekibidi eved. K'moshe kasav betrumas hadesh and a rishon tarch gadol havekibidi eved. So what's the practical halacha concerning this point? Rav Yosef Tzvi Rimon discusses this question at length. Notes that the Noda B'Yehuda suggests another option of listening to Sheva Brachas recited at another chasana. Ayin b'tshuvas Noda B'Yehuda. Advar Masada Kiddushin Shabich Birchas Ha'eris Birchas Nesuim B'lo Asara. We have a Rav. He did the wedding without 10. Aval Kol Zeh HaKiddushin V'Chuppah Gamru Kinyonim. But the kinyan of Kiddushin and the chuppah worked. So v'sayin to be called makom ein hefsed kasher yizdamin sham nesuin yamdum gam azug hazeh samuch l'chuppah. He says, let's say there's another wedding, and there they have 10. They should go near there, and they should have in mind lotzes bebracha shevarch lachos v'kol acherim.
How does it work? The people that answer, it's a bracha.
No.
They have in mind.
And the guy who makes the bracha should have in mind. He says, "V'gam hamavarach yichavin lotzia." The ones who make the bracha should have them in mind as well. Rav Rimon suggests that if possible, one could use this advice by having them watch another wedding on Zoom at the same time as their own and listen to the Sheva brachas and respond, Amen. Im nikach es kivno shel Noda B'Yehuda, v'noimer shenitan levarach birchas chasal mishtei chasunos. Basically, you're reciting the Sheva brachas for 2 weddings. Nitin latzia, he gives advice, sheyasu sachupa lelo brachos, make the chuppah v'kiddushin without the 10 people, without the Sheva brachos, because they don't have 10. Ulam yasu otam b'magbil chatuna b'mokom acher. They should do it simultaneously with another wedding where there are 10 people there. Shebo mutar shiyu 10 anoshim. For example, in another locale, they were allowed to gather more than 10 people. In this locale, you can't. So they make the wedding without the 10 in that locale, but they have the other wedding on Zoom. Vazug hasheni yiro otam beZoom. Often they yitachim shiyotzin they sheva brachos. Onan kevan sezem mechudat. This is a new novelty. Meim choshum sheyasigu minyan b'toch shivas yimei mishtat. Let's say they know at one of the points in the next 7 days they'll be able to get a minyan. Adiv shaloi linig b'derech zu. They shouldn't do the Zoom business. Kach yuchlu achar kach levaras birchas hasonim basara. So it means as long as they have one birchas hasonim in the next 7 days with a minyan, that'll suffice. Ulamim yodi.
That's what I'm saying. Right now, some people will not have 7 Sheva brachos. They'll have
But
one at a wedding, and that's enough.
That's enough.
It's
Me'ikar
not.
adin, you've fulfilled what you need. What he's saying is, let's say there were no 10 people at the
Right.
wedding, but 4 days from now, you're gonna have a meal, and there's gonna be 10
Yes.
people. They'll say Sheva Brachos, and they'll be, that's enough.
Mhm.
This has to be done once,
So does that mean that
within 7 days.
the marriage is not consummated till after the Sheva Brachos? That shouldn't be the case.
No, I don't think it's the case, because I don't think it's the case. If yodim shelo tiyeh lahem kol efshort limtzo asara b'chol shivas yimei meshta, harei shelo b'magbil lezug shemitchat v'omer sheva brachos yesh b'kach hidur. He says if they don't think they're going to get 10 people in the next 7 days, they should do the Zoom business with another wedding.
Mhm.
What about, would it be permitted to assemble a minyan via Zoom and conduct Sheva Brachos in this manner? We've been learning now that for Davar Shebekdusha, you must have 10 people in the same room. Baruch Hu, Kedusha, Kaddish, that we've at Kriyas Torah, we've established that. We've discussed maybe Zoom Birchas HaGomel, right? We said maybe Zoom Birchas, because it's not a Davar Shebekdusha, it's just for Pisum Anes. We talked about during Bris Milah. There's no minyan required there. Well, could you gather these 10 people via Zoom? Might this be similar to the case of Birchas HaGomel, where certain poskim were willing to consider this possibility? To answer this question, we must determine what the purpose of the minyan is in the context of Sheva Brachos. If it's equivalent to a standard Davar Shebekdusha, such as Kedusha and Chazaras HaShatz, then almost all poskim would not allow forming a minyan by Zoom. If, on the other hand, it's more similar to publicizing the event, then perhaps it would be possible, similar to what we saw regarding Birchas HaGomel. So tonight's shiur is coming together the way they wanted it to come together, right? First, we learned about Birchas HaGomel, and we see that there may be similarities, because that bracha is for Pirsum Anes. Some Rishonim, such as the Shita Mekubetches, hold that Birchas Chasanim is considered a Davar Shebekdusha, like any other tefillah that requires a minyan. Right? Minay lebirchas chasanim basar shenemar vayikach Boaz asra noshim. Stoma de milsa shlok kansan lebirchas chasanim. It's clear that he gathered them to make Sheva Brachos. The imishum eidim o kinyan betray sagile. If he wanted to have witnesses for the kinyan, all you need is 2 people. Halo kansan lebracha bilvad umitnei shedavar shebekdusha ulevarchas Hashem kines asar. Because he's going to recite Hashem's name, he gathered 10. Lashon HaGaonim. But the Tosfos Harid and other Rishon takes the approach that the purpose of the minyan is to honor the crowd gathered, known as Kavod HaTzibur, and it would not constitute a Davar Shebekdusha. And this is stated by the Aruch HaShulchan. Ein mevarchas birchas chasarim el basara. Af agav de lav Davar Shebekdusha hu kekadish u'kedusha. The Aruch HaShulchan says very clearly it's not like kedusha or kaddish. Shlo yitamar b'chol, you can't say it less than 10. Mikol makom kevin de omrim shakol bar lichvodo, meaning lichvoda nes. So everything is done for Hashem's honor. So it's being done to honor Hashem. And you say binyan Yerushalayim ein miderech hakavod. It's not kavodik laskim b'pachos masara. Third possible approach as to why we have 10 people for Sheva Brachos is that the purpose of having a minyan for the brachos is to publicize the event. And a comment of the Mishnah Berurah with regard to Birchas HaGomel, that the one reciting the bracha is included as one of the 10 for the minyan. The Mishnah Berurah then derives that the same applies to Sheva Brachos as well, since the basis for the requirement of minyan is similar in both. Says the Mishnah Berurah, near the Yesh La'akel v'samech l'davar da'achol din da'asay alfinan mivermum b'kalam, we can be makel to include the chasan as one of the 10. Im ken kamo gam gabi birchas chasanim dialfinam gam ken lechad man da'amar b'makelos baruch Hashem, that you do it because you've gathered the people. Afilu hachi chasanim in a minyan. Just like by birchas HaGomel, the person could be part of the minyan, so can the chasan. Koshken bracha a birchas HaGomel dekila. The lekama poskim mispar sarayim ma'akev klal di'evet. We learned tonight that number of poskim held that you don't need a minyan for birchas HaGomel. So that's certainly the guy who's making the bracha can be part of the minyan, but even for Shava Brachas, it could work. So we have three approaches. The Shita Mikubetza says it's a Davar Shebekdusha. The Aruch HaShulchan says it's for the Covid of Tzibur. The Mishnah Berurah says it's like Birchas HaGomel. So since we saw previously the purpose of meaning for Birchas HaGomel is to publicize the events, so maybe the Mishnah Berurah's comparison to Birchas Chasanim indicates that the min for Birchas Chasanim as well is designed for the same purpose. So how do these reasons relate to whether a minyan on Zoom can be permitted? Rav Riman suggests that according to the first approach of the Shita Mikubetzes, a minyan created via Zoom would not be valid. But according to the second and third approaches, perhaps a minyan created where everyone can see each other, even if they are not located in the same place, would be sufficient to allow reciting the Sheva Brachos. He notes that a number of contemporary poskim do not accept the second approach of the Aruch HaShulchan. If it's a Dover Shebekdusha, you can't count the minyan by Zoom. Because you need the Shechina to come down. Ulan imidubar al Covid, yitachen shetzir b'Zoom yoil. The gathering of 10 people via Zoom would work. Levada imidubar al Pirsum, and certainly if you're spreading the word, Zoom would be fine. Shreisov sof advar misparsimim. Yesh livchon et ramat ha-Pirsum aval mistaber shekayom chatunot b'Zoom nizkeret b'tzur tova meod. People remember weddings by Zoom, so it's going to be Pirsum. It gets even more notoriety than the old-fashioned weddings. Omnam, yesh levchon nekuda zuv. Omnam yitachen shem roim echad et hasheni b'Zoom. B'chol ofen yesh kan Pirsum must be. However, the Rav Vosner b'Shevet HaLevi lo yiskim lekabel et tzvoras Aruch HaShulchan that for COVID, the cause of Shabor shechupa yibegered dvarim shebekdusha. He thinks that chuppah is a davar shebekdusha. She'en lecha kitshur Hashem gadol mizeh. Shemafarsim avarchim al kedushas Yisrael. V'lachein mesayim birchas ha'eretz mekadesh amo Yisrael yidei chuppah v'kiddushin. U'lefis first elu yefshar yalom birchas chasanim b'emtzozu. So, based on Rav Vosner's opinion, you would not be able to do it via Zoom. Okay. So, I suggest that we will conclude the Zoom halachos in the first 10 minutes or so of next week's shiur, and then we will begin volume 7. Anybody who needs volume 7, I have them at my home, and we'll start the last volume of Yoredeya. Mirz Hashem, in 2-3 months, we'll finish Yoredeya. We'll make a big simcha. Okay, shkoyach, everybody. Have a good week, everybody.
Have a good night. Thank you.
Shkoyach.
Okay, good night.